As this elderly gentleman approached the end of his life, the hospital's nursing team went out of their way to arrange a final meeting with his beloved dog. Little did they know, an astonishing turn of events awaited them, one that would profoundly alter the old man's destiny. Battling cancer relentlessly, David King was faced with a terminal illness that seemed unrelenting. Despite his determined struggle, cancer's grip remained unyielding. A glimmer of hope emerged when doctors thought David had overcome the disease and entered remission, but this optimism was short-lived as his health abruptly deteriorated, leaving few avenues to explore. Amid the dwindling options, an experimental cancer treatment surfaced, holding a faint promise of a turnaround. Unfortunately, its cost lay far beyond the family's financial reach. With limited choices remaining, the focus shifted to ensuring David's comfort in the final phase of his journey. At this juncture, a sense of tranquility enveloped him. David had tried to prepare himself and his family for this moment, but there was one thing that lingered in his wife Cindy's thoughts: his beloved dog, Lil Fee. Lil Fee, a small Yorkie mix, had become deeply attached during David's homebound, illness-stricken years. Lil Fee was a constant presence, mirroring his every move, sensing when he needed support as he coughed or sought a rest, cuddling up on his chest to keep him warm. Lil Fee accompanied David everywhere, from the grocery store to the post office and their daily walks, even if it was just a short stroll around the block. She didn't mind, as long as she was with her cherished owner. As David departed for the hospital, likely for the last time, Lil Fee pressed her head against the front glass door, watching wistfully as the family car vanished into the distance. The family, as well as David, believed it might be their final farewell. In fact, he had plastered pictures of Lil Fee alongside his family on the wall beside his bed. However, his wife Cindy was determined to have one last visit for Lil Fee. To her surprise, when the nurses overheard her scheming one day, they offered to help. There was a strict no-animal policy in the hospital, but the nurses thought that Cindy could put the dog into a big purse, but only if Lil Fee could be quiet, which she wasn't known to do. Even the slightest noise could blow their chances. This is why Cindy enlisted the help of their youngest granddaughter, Ellie, who hadn't visited David yet either. If there was one person he was more attached to than Lil Fee, it was Ellie. However, she was afraid of seeing him in such a different state and refused to accept that he might be gone soon. At 11 years old, she was old enough to know that her grandfather wasn't going to be alive for much longer. As soon as he had been diagnosed with cancer, she had begun researching extensively. Ellie was a very smart kid. She started off accompanying her grandfather to his visits, pushing the doctors with complicated questions, and making sure they were always doing and monitoring the right thing. She had fewer and fewer questions until eventually she knew all the answers and struggled to accept them. But when she was asked to help her grandmother smuggle the dog in, she knew how much it would mean to her grandfather. So, despite Ellie's fears, she agreed to help. However, she couldn't bring herself to come into the room the next morning. The two of them entered the hospital with Cindy carrying a large black bag and Ellie working interference, distracting everyone who got too close. Passing through the entry door and the reception desk wasn't a problem. But once Cindy was getting closer to David's room, she could hear a muffled squeal coming from the bag, and Lil Fee was wriggling around in anticipation. Somehow she could feel her owner nearby. As a staff member walked in their direction, making an inquisitive expression at the size of a handbag, they were seconds away from being busted and thrown out of the hospital. Ellie rushed up to him and hit him with a barrage of questions, asking about the hospital, her grandfather, and even what happened after death. She knew how to play up her age when needed, and the distraction worked. Cindy was able to provide just enough cover to make it into the room. David turned over in his bed as they entered, a smile slowly spread across his face, happy to see his wife. Then he grew glossy with shock when she opened up her purse, revealing the surprise she had brought. Jumping out of the bag and onto his bed, Lil Fee nuzzled its face against David's, trying to get even closer than possible. However, David couldn't reciprocate. He was so weakened that even moving his arms was difficult, and the last couple of days had left him heavy, his disused muscles gluing him to the bed. Lil Fee licked his face, trying to elicit a response, but with no luck. Knowing how much David loved his dog, His motionlessness only proved how paralyzed he was by pain. His face was making small creases and folds, reaching, but the old man was a shell of his former self. The dog cleverly burrowed beneath one of David's arms, then gracefully arched its back, positioning itself onto his chest. In a heartening sight, Cindy observed her husband's arms slowly rise from the bed, creating a cradle around Lil Fee. Initially, it was all Lil Fee's doing, yet as the dog settled, David gently drew her nearer, adding his strength to the embrace. It was a deeply moving moment, one that tugged at Cindy's emotions while she captured the scene in her mind's eye. Expecting imminent goodbyes due to David's frail state, Cindy had orchestrated the dog's visit, anticipating the end was near. However, David summoned a final surge of strength, a testament to the man she cherished. Yet another surprise awaited her. As David's right arm adjusted, it brushed against a much smaller hand that was maneuvering within the bed. Raising his head above the dog, David met the gaze of Ellie, who stood by his side, teary-eyed yet filled with emotion. Grasping his wrinkled hand between her own, David had overcome his paralysis, propping himself up to embrace his cherished granddaughter. Lil Fee, nestled in the middle, didn't mind the cozy squeeze. After what seemed like an eternity of hugging, Ellie shifted to the bedside, expressing regret for not visiting sooner. Expecting disappointment, Ellie found solace in her grandfather's forgiveness. He assured her that blame had no place here. Such situations were hard for everyone. His joy lay in the present moment, relishing her company. Ellie then captured memories, snapping photos of David with his faithful dog as she prepared to bid her farewells. Though heartwarming, the encounter was tinged with the realization that her visits couldn't change the inevitable. Returning home, she shared the pictures on Twitter, unknowingly igniting a chain of events that transcended her inner circle. The images resonated worldwide, amassing thousands of likes and prompting numerous requests. Responding to the call, Ellie initiated an online fundraising drive for her grandfather's cause. Without disclosing the experimental cancer treatment, the cause managed to gather over $50,000 within a day, fully covering the treatment cost. When she returned to her grandfather the next day, she had secured a last shot at survival, with the medication promptly authorized. While doctors cautioned about its uncertain effectiveness, as weeks turned into months, it was clear that the treatment was granting David more time than expected, a value beyond measure. Each day held newfound significance. Ellie faithfully visited him daily, pledging her presence until the very end. David could savor precious moments with his beloved family, all thanks to his faithful companion, Lil Fee. The hospital staff was well aware of Cindy and Ellie's covert dog visits, having read about it online. Yet in the subsequent months, they consciously chose to ignore this breach, offering approving nods or sly winks as Cindy walked through, carrying a sizable bag. The patient's happiness took precedence over stringent hospital regulations, and the staff was content to contribute, knowing their actions mattered more than rules. What do you think of this story? Let us know in the comments section. Thank you.